1, 2, 3. No, I'm just kicking it off here. Who are we missing? Where's Christian? 30 seconds, please, Dave. Good evening and welcome to the March 8th Prior Lake Spring Lake Watershed District Board of Managers meeting. Our first order of business, please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the
flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Our next item on the agenda is we have a new manager with us here this evening. So we're going to swear in Dr. Christian Morkeberg. So Christian, if you would please, if you could repeat after me. I, Christian Morkeberg, do solemnly swear.
I, Christian Morkeberg, do solemnly swear.
That I will support the Constitution of the United States.
That I will support the Constitution of the United States.
And of the state of Minnesota.
And of the state of Minnesota.
And will faithfully discharge the duties of the office of manager.
And will faithfully discharge the duties of the office of manager.
Of the Prior Lake Spring Lake Watershed District to the best of my judgment and ability.
Of the Prior Lake Spring Lake Watershed District to the best of my judgment and ability.
Congratulations, sir. That's it. You're
Thank
hooked.
You.
Thank you. And all I'll say is he's got more than enough judgment and ability, and that's why he was appointed by our colleagues at the county and the rest of the jurisdictions that weigh in. So we're very fortunate to have you, Christian. He's been part of the CAC for a long, long time and deeply committed to the water resources of our community for, again, a long, long time. So awesome, and thank you for volunteering and participating with us, Christian.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here, and I look forward to doing it. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, our next item on the agenda is the public comment period, and I am aware, we do have individuals from the public here, and we do have somebody that wishes to speak this evening. So if anybody else would like to speak at the public comment period, we have a microphone over there. Go ahead and come on up, and you can go to that, and then you'll see at the base of the microphone, there's a button, and you can turn that on. When it's green, that means it's on. And if you can please state your name and address for the record, please, sir.
Thank you. I do it right?
You can.
Hello, my name is Adam Greengard. My address is 8623 Journey Lane in Savage, Minnesota. This is a new residence for me and my family as of October 1st this past year. And as I said, I am a homeowner on Kate's Lake, which is a new lake to me. Having lived in the metro my whole life, I didn't know of it, and was very excited at the opportunity to live there and bring my family there. Unfortunately, and to our surprise, our first canoe ride on the lake demonstrated that there is a large invasive problem within the lake itself. And I'm here today to become more involved and help in any capacity I can to deal with the goldfish infestation within Kate's Lake. They're in there, obviously spread out throughout the lake and are of all sizes. And knowing what I know about the environment, lake health, and biology, I knew immediately this was not good. So these invasives have both a detrimental biological and aesthetic effect, and I present a need for further analysis and scientific-based solutions that not only assist the homeowners, but the public, which also has access to the lake, and most importantly, to the larger ecosystem as a whole. And I eagerly await any follow-up and abilities the Watershed District has, along with their partnerships, to help problem solve this significant issue.
Great. Thank you, Adam. Thanks
Thank
for
you.
coming. Appreciate it. Is there anybody else in the chambers that would like to speak at the public comment period? Seeing none, we're going to move on to the next item, and that is to approve the agenda. And for that, I'm first of all going to see with my colleagues, are there any changes to the agenda this evening? Seeing none, Joni, do you have any changes? So then I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
Motion to approve the agenda.
Second.
We have a motion and a second on the floor. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Frank, are you an aye? Aye. Thank you. I have to watch him, so anybody at home, I always have to keep my eye on Frank. He's a troublemaker here for us. So that motion approves 4-0. Thank you. So then we're on to other old new business, and we've got our board officer appointment is our first item. Joni, did you have anything you were going to do to introduce this, or you want me to?
President Meiser, if you could introduce this.
Or actually, so typically at an annual period of time, maybe I'm going to start then, Kurt, and I think you're going to make the motion for us this evening, but typically this is a time where we, or at some time during the year, we appoint the executive positions for the watershed, and we're now we're doing it at this meeting. So Kurt, I think you're going to make a motion for us. Let's do it en masse. For the officer appointments. Yep.
I make a motion for the new appointees to be appointed to the Spring Lake Watershed District.
And each of them are what? What are the individuals?
President Meiser, Vice President Loney, Treasurer Morkeberg, and Secretary Boyles.
And do we have a second? We have a second. So we have motion and second on the floor. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. That motion carries 4-0. Thank you all. Okay, the next item on the agenda is the program and projects update. Take it away, please.
All right, so the monthly carp management update goes as follows. In Upper Prior Lake, we are seeing a good aggregation. The location's correct, and I'll show that in the next few slides. We are just waiting for commercial netters and their availability. So they've been quite busy lately. They will be out looking at the aggregation later this week and if that aggregation continues to stay in the correct location, likely this weekend we'll have a seining event. Spring Lake does not look like the aggregation or locations are favorable for commercial netting. In Spring Lake, they are scattered. We spent the better part of last week with our underwater speaker trying to keep the carp from locating in the deep section of the central west or central eastern basin. We've been successful at dispersing the carp, but they have not found their way into our known seining grounds, which are located in the north and western portion of the lake and the far eastern portion of the lake.
Jeff, do we only have 4 radio tag carp left on Spring Lake?
We have currently 6 that are active at the moment.
But only 2 showed up on the radar? Is that what you're, or I mean, only 4 showed up on the radar out of the 6?
There's likely 2 of them have duplicate dots right here. We have been seeing 6. This was the map that was created. I can't explain where the other 2 went.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. In Upper Prior Lake, we've been consistently seeing 6 radio tags. The group in the western portion here are all basically within the seining grounds. These are the aggregation that hopefully we'll go after this upcoming weekend.
Jeff, might I ask a question on the Upper Prior one? And I know that you've used the speakers even before in an attempt to do some gill netting. Would you attempt to move those items that are across from Knotty Ore?
This whole winter, the carp have been very reactive to our speakers. So I've got a little concern about using speakers right now. last week we attempted to remove them through the district and WSB's activities. And our presence of putting nets in the lake spooked fish across the lake. So it's been kind of a balance.
So maybe to clarify that you wouldn't want to put speakers by, say, 149, 424, the ones across Nodding Oar, to try and get those to move into to aggregate that way, because for fear of moving the others or
That is
smoking the
correct.
rest of them. Is that what I'm
At the
hearing then?
moment, yes.
Okay. Well, I'm going to wish you luck. Okay, thank
Thanks.
Do you have any estimates, Jeff, on what the population might be in that area where the three of them are grouped together?
Yeah, where the three of them are grouped together, we're looking at probably 15,000 pounds.
Okay.
It's on the edge. So what we're working with right now is commercial netters are hesitant to want to go after a size that small. So that's smaller than we would typically want to go after them. We're just, at this time of year, we're becoming a little more risk tolerant towards how we, want to spend our netting funds.
So could I actually that brings up a good question. So again, we have a net. We've employed WSB in the past, I believe also individually. Would that be an option if a commercial fisherman is not willing to go after that we would go after that?
We would use the district, WSB's gill nets. We don't have the actual equipment, nor does WSB, to rope in the seining nets under ice. When it's open water, we can use our district net again, like we did this last fall.
Okay, so we're then fully reliant on a commercial fisherman. Could you help me understand that if this is maybe on the small side, are you thinking that there could be an additional contribution that maybe might be required in order to entice somebody to do this? And even the reason I'm even asking that is rather than assume that that the board wouldn't fund it or use some of the monies that we have available to do something out of the ordinary, just because it seems it's difficult to even get them even in this situation. And while I know we'd love 30,000 or 40,000 pounds, 15,000 is a pretty significant number. And I'd be very curious to not necessarily write off the fact that we don't want to go after them. I'd sort of be curious to find out what any additional cost might be in order to track somebody to get 15,000 out, because that'd still be a big chunk, right? If we could get 15,000 out every year or a couple times a year, that's a big deal.
That is correct. Yes, we do have the ability to maneuver our contract with the commercial netters. Right now, we have it set up where the district pays a netting fee.
Right.
So when that net gets in the water, so there's a mobilization, a netting, and then an individual bounty per pound. So we pay.
Gotcha. So in essence, you're saying then it isn't off the table where originally that's what I was assuming what you meant by that. Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, last month was kind of my first month representing the projects in this format. So what we decided to try this month was using the same format, but then all the updates for the projects will be in the green text. So feel free to give me feedback after this if you want to see this moving forward. But so these are the 6 upper watershed blueprint projects that were determined from the study. So what the board has chosen is their top 6 projects that we want to move forward with. And the Spring Lake West Iron Enhanced Sand Filter, we had approved that study. We found just a couple minor errors after it had been approved, so we are just updating that. And then after that's finalized, we are going to move forward with figuring out how to contact landowners that may be interested in putting projects on their land to improve water quality. Those include an option of iron enhanced sand filters. We have 8 different options ranging in price quite a bit. So we have some work to do figuring out which of the filters to move forward with. The Sutton Lake Iron Enhanced Sand Filter will be discussed in more detail later on in the meeting, but the final feasibility report was included in the board meeting packet for review, and if the board decides to approve it at this meeting, that will be finalized. And I'm sorry, these are feasibility studies, just to clarify, they're not actually like projects, but they're feasibility studies to figure out if these projects are feasible to in fact move forward with. And then one of the other projects we're calling the Buck Lake East Wetland Enhancement Feasibility Study. That's kind of in the planning phases, and we're determining different options to potentially enhance a wetland that could hold back some water for flood storage and also improve water quality downstream. So we're exploring a lot of different options right now, and we're going to have a meeting with the landowners on April 5th to kind of get their feedback and see what they would like to see in this wetland area that borders their property. The last three, as you can see, there's no green text on those. Those are projects that we will be soliciting proposals for in the future.
Jamie, could I pause you for, yeah, going back to that, thank you. It's great to see the dates on there for at least the two, and of course we know the Spring Lake West one is happening, but is it possible on the bottom three, because those also were in the same position last month, is it possible to put dates on those as to when that will get done too? Or those will get done? Joni?
Manager Miser, we can put together, proposed dates. They may change, but we can try to give you a sense of when we're planning to put those forward.
That'd be great.
Those
Thank-
will be contingent on whether we are going to use grant funds to fund those.
Or we decide that we want to pay for them ourselves.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
So there's some other projects that we have going on in the upper watershed that weren't a result of the upper watershed blueprint study that we did, but that we have were already started or that are also important projects. So we installed the outlet at the on Sutton Lake last year, and we're moving forward with a management plan on the Sutton Lake outlet structure to potentially manipulate that outlet and the water levels to improve habitat on Sutton Lake. So we met with the landowners on March 1st to get their feedback on what they would also like to see within Sutton Lake, what they value on Sutton Lake, and what they would like to see happening in the future. So we got their feedback, and overall, if you see the graph on the right, it was overall pretty positive feedback. Half of the landowners had attended that meeting, and only one was completely against the project, but everybody else was either somewhat in favor or completely in favor. And that's kind of the same situation where we're just looking at different options on how to improve the habitat, but we have to meet with DNR to review all those plans and get their feedback on what they think about our plans that we're proposing. And then the Gully Stabilization Project, that's a project that we'll also be discussing later on in the board meeting today. And we also have some projects in the outlet channel, the Prior Lake outlet channel that connects Prior Lake to the Minnesota River. After the flood, there was a lot of bank erosion and sediment deposition, and FEMA did pay for like $1 million worth of bank repair, but there was some bank erosion that they decided wasn't actually caused from the flood, that was maybe there before. So we're moving forward this year with repairing the bank erosion where FEMA didn't pay for it. So we're meeting with landowners and moving forward with getting easements so we can access the property and get the work done. So after that, we'll be bidding out the projects. And one of the projects is removing a bunch of sediment that settled in this pond, which is what it was designed for, so it does need to get dredged every once in a while. So last week, the majority of the sediment in that pond was removed. There's still a little bit of sediment within the culvert that needs to be dredged out yet, but that's mostly done. And then we're working with getting a contract for a company that will televise the outlet pipe. So there's a pipe that's nearly a half-mile long that leads from Prior Lake to the beginning of the outlet channel, where we say it daylights, where it's actually not in a pipe. So we televise the pipe to see if there's any damage or repair that needs to be done, and we do that every 2 years just to make sure that everything's looking good, and if they have any recommendations on things to improve the pipe. Any questions on the projects before I move forward? Perfect. And just a quick reminder that we do have the Growing Healthy Soils event next week. That's going to be at Ridges in Jordan on March 16th from 11 to 3 p.m. This is intended mostly for farmers or other agency folk that work with farmers. We'll be talking about innovative ways for soil management, like cover crops and other similar conservation projects that other farmers have used. So if you're interested in attending that, the RSVP is this Friday. So just let me know if you'd like me to reserve it for you.
Kurt? Not yet.
Wanted to thank you for doing a good job on organizing this. This is, folks, if you get a chance to go to this, I strongly suggest you do. It's all about agriculture practices, all about soil conservation, soil erosion. It was very well done, and the speakers they had were excellent. It's was well organized and well presented, so thank you.
Thanks. And then we did provide a presentation for the Spring Lake Town Hall annual meeting that actually starts in about a half hour, so we did record that for them so they could play it at their virtual meeting. And that's just a summary of everything that the watershed did within Spring Lake Township. And that's not supposed to be there, and that's all.
Anybody else have any questions? Doesn't look like it. Okay, thanks, Jamie. Okay, we're on to the Aquatic Vegetation Survey results. Steve?
So
Go ahead, Jamie.
President Meiser, we have Steve McComas with us this evening to share with us his findings on aquatic plants, surveys that he did in some of the district lakes in 2021.
Very much for the opportunity to present. It's always a pleasure to be at this meeting and working on the district lakes. Been a very active watershed district, and there's quite a list of exciting projects coming up. But what I was going to talk about is the aquatic plants and the survey results from last year. So I thought I would just start with what we did. We had 5 lakes last year that we looked at for aquatic plants: pike, prior, spring, buck, and fish. For several of those lakes, fish, prior, and spring, we did curly leaf management, where we went out and we first delineated areas that could be treated, and then we made recommendations or looked at the data and determined if we should treat or don't treat. And then we went out and assessed the curly leaf population in June, which would be peak abundance, to see what did happen, what was the fate, so to speak, of the curly leaf. So starting out, when we do our delineations in early April, there's not much curly leaf around. We have to be able to make some predictions as to what the curly leaf will do in June. So in April, we're working at low levels, but we have a pretty good technique that if we get 3 or 4 stems on a rake, we know that by June, that would be a heavy growth. So then those areas are circled up, and that's how we kind of put together our treatment maps. We need to treat these lakes before water temperatures hit 60 degrees. That's why there's some urgency to get out there early. Well, in Fish Lake, we did what's called a Meander Survey, where we just do a zigzag pattern around the whole entire lake, and we take rake samples to look for curlyleaf. And that first map on the left is in April, and we only found curlyleaf in kind of the northwest end of the lake to any degree. All the black dots on that lake are samples where there were no curlyleaf, and then the red dots are heavy growth, yellow dots, moderate growth, and the green dots would be light growth, predicted growth in April. So based on that scarce, relatively scarce curlyleaf, we recommended that there be no treatment needed this year. Now the question is, we go back in June, and was that a correct prediction or not? Turns out when we did our assessment in June, it was probably a good idea that we didn't have to treat. You can see that the curlyleaf that was present in June, which is kind of peak abundance, was found at several areas on the west side, but all at light growth, not a recreational nor an ecological type problem. So Fish Lake has had relatively low curlyleaf densities and abundance for the last few years. Spring Lake was a little bit different story. There was indications of about 20, we delineated 22 acres for treatment in Spring Lake, and you can see it's kind of on the western edge and that mid-south side of Spring Lake. It was treated in June, and then we went back and looked to see how good was the treatment, and at the same time determine if there was any kind of surprising curlyleaf growth. Turns out that the treatment areas were very well controlled with curlyleaf. We found a few patches, a few stems of relatively light growth of curlyleaf. So the 22 acres that were treated were very well done, and we had good control in Spring Lake. Just a little bit of a history on Spring Lake. It has had some fairly robust curlyleaf in the past. This is a picture from 2000, and based on that, we started doing some harvesting and herbicide use, kind of as an experiment in 2002 and 2003. There was a harvesting area on the west end and a herbicide area right there in the center part. And we did that for a couple of years and found that harvesting was not as efficient maybe as the herbicide. So then we switched over and did herbicides for the last few years, and then all of a sudden curlyleaf kind of disappeared for about 8-9 years. From 2007 to 2015 there was no treatment, but we started tracking curlyleaf and circling up areas where we were finding it, so whether it was treated or not. And you can see what we call a hotspot map over a period of about 7 or 8 years. It's fairly consistent where curlyleaf shows up. It's just that there's variation from year to year, but the locations are fairly persistent. So this is what we call a hotspot map for curlyleaf in Spring Lake. Kind of a history going back to 2000 of treatments. The yellow indicates years of some type of a treatment or control. There was a gap there for a few years. In the last few years, we have been treating some curlyleaf. Last year, 2021, we treated over 22 acres, a little bit above average for Spring Lake. Well, Prior Lake also has curlyleaf pondweed. And again, the black dots are areas where there was no curlyleaf. The green, yellow, and red dots are areas where we did find projected heavy growth of curlyleaf by June. So in April, again, it's very light. But we ended up with about 43 acres that we circled up, and then those 43 acres were treated, and we went back and assessed in June. You can see that the curlyleaf is fairly sparse in the north half of Lower Prior. Well, we'll talk about the hotspot areas next or shortly, but those areas are fairly persistent or consistent. So the treatment occurred in May, and we came back and did our kind of assessment in June. What we found is that in Upper Prior, there is very good control. And that has had some patches of some pretty heavy growth of curlyleaf in the past, but in this case, it was well controlled. In Lower Prior, the areas that were delineated for treatment, we had fairly good control, but just that we didn't treat everything in Prior and Lower Prior in 2021, and you can see that one little channel there on the east end of Lower Pryor, there's some red dots, there was some curlyleaf. That's been an area that is, a fairly narrow channel. We don't get 150 feet spacing, so we don't always treat that area, and it's a pretty good, it's a hot spot for curlyleaf pondweed. In fact, here is our hotspot map. Here we have about 7 or 8 years of areas that we have treated. And you can see that there's a pattern there. Then within those persistent areas, there's variation from year to year. So those are the areas we kind of zero in on. There's large parts of Lower Pryor without curlyleaf, as well as relatively large areas in Upper Pryor without curlyleaf. Treatment history of both lakes is here. Last year we treated about 43 acres, and that's one of the higher curlyleaf treatments that we've done in the last 10, 12 years.
Steve?
Yes.
I have a question, if you can toggle back to Spring Lake. My understanding is we had an outbreak of Eurasian water milfoil. Do you know anything about that?
Yep, sure do.
Okay, did you mention that? I didn't catch it. If you
Nope, that's going to be.
That's coming up?
We didn't see Eurasian milfoil in April and June, but we did see it in July, and we have some maps on that. When we were doing that point intercept survey, it did come up.
Okay,
We'll
thank
be
you.
hitting that. I hope it's okay, Kurt. We'll hit that in a few minutes. Including, in fact, looking at the point intercept surveys, these are more of a intensive survey where you put a grid on a lake and you sample all these grid points around the lake. And then you look at each sample site and record the plant. So we did point intercept plant surveys on these 4 lakes. Buck Lake was one lake we did, and it had fairly good coverage of aquatic plants, and these are all non-native plants in Buck Lake. The greens are light, yellows are moderate, reds are heavy growth. There were plants throughout most of Buck Lake, and the dominant plant was coontail, which has been pretty consistent over the years. 4 species of plants were found. That's not a great diversity, but the lake is plenty healthy regarding native plants. We also did the same type of a survey on Pike Lake. And those points and those dots represent the grid, and then we record all plants that are found at each of those points. The red dots in the West Basin indicate fairly heavy growth or abundant growth, and the dominant plant in Pike Lake in 2021 was coontail, and there's some pretty heavy growth in that West Basin, a little bit sparser, less abundant in the East Basin. Pike Lake had 7 species of aquatic plants, a little bit better diversity in that system. Pike Lake has also had Eurasian milfoil. We first found it in about 2013. It wasn't on a grid pattern. We found it on its own. Maybe it was 2012 is where we found it. Since then, it took a little while to get around the lake. It peaked, so to speak, in 2017 and has been kind of fluctuating around 20, 30, 40% occurrence over the years. There was a big burst of activity in 2017, a lot of heavy growth, and then it settled down over the last few years, where there's mostly light to moderate growth, fairly well distributed, but with light to moderate growth, not really topping out too much. One thing we did find this last year was first observation of zebra mussels in Pike Lake, and found it at one location, and we tracked it, noted it, sent it to the watershed district, and the DNR has also then probably listed Pike Lake for zebra mussels. Well, Spring Lake, we did do this point intercept survey here. Because of the projects going on in Spring Lake, we have a fairly dense grid sampling pattern. And one of the surprises, to a large degree, was Spring Lake now has 15 species of submerged plants. That's an all-time high for submerged plant species in Spring Lake. So the diversity and the types of plants are improving or increasing. Coontail is a dominant plant. And this happened, we did this survey on July 12th, and at the same time, we did find Eurasian milfoil. One of the first observations, it's probably been there for a little bit. It looks a lot like northern milfoil, which is a native plant, but the watershed district, the Lake Association, and the DNR kind of collaborated, went around, did some hand pulling, did some treatments, and treated most of the heavy growth of Eurasian milfoil, knowing that at this point, that by the time we found it, and as widespread as it wasn't going to be eliminated from the lake. We're pretty much in a management and control mode in Spring Lake for Eurasian water milfoil. So right now, most of the milfoil is on the western end of Spring Lake, and it has some patches. You can see a picture of Eurasian milfoil there to the right. It's in these clumps, and it's called root crowns, and you have 5 or 6 stems of plants coming out from a root crown, and it hasn't really developed persistent beds of milfoil. It's still kind of patches, but those could change. It's going to get worse before it gets better. I would suspect this next year, look for a little bit more milfoil than we had last year. But like Pike Lake and like Prior Lake, it'll peak and then it'll settle down and form some type of an equilibrium, probably at a lesser degree than it is found when it's at its peak growing conditions. Oh, here's a little graph of species richness, which is just another name for number of species that are found in a lake over time. We have records going back to 1948. I didn't do those, but I've been on Spring Lake for a long time, but not that long. So we peaked at 15 species in 2021, which is a nice trend for diversity and for aquatic plant stability really out in the lake. We have had several point intercept surveys over the years, and those results are also encouraging. In 2015, which was an alum year, we had 33% coverage. And in 2018, by 2018, it dipped a bit. 2019 started coming up. In 2020, we had 25% coverage. And last year, we had one of our better years of plant coverage at 34% of the lake area. And kind of as a rule of thumb, if you can get 40% coverage of aquatic plants, a lot of times those plants will help sustain good water clarity in the long term. So plants are important for good water clarity in lakes as well. It's going in that right direction. We also did a similar type of survey, point intercept survey, on Upper Prior. And here the plants are a little bit more sparse. That Mud Bay has a pretty good coverage, plant coverage. These are all native plants. And so does the southwest arm down there. Pretty good coverage. Milfoil is present in Upper Prior, but these days it's relegated to relatively shallow nearshore areas, mostly green dots, meaning light growth, versus heavier growth, and the yellow and the red dots are less noticeable. Well, when we've done point intercept surveys on both lakes, so we look at Upper and Lower together. Upper Prior or Lower Prior has pretty good plant coverage. Typically has a little bit better distribution. It's clearer, has more plants than Upper Prior. So you can kind of see the trends there over the years. But we look specifically at Upper Prior. We started out, when our first surveys was done in 2015, we had 9% coverage, plants growing out to 6 feet of water depth. Well, the coverage has started to improve and increase over the last few years, and in 2021, we had 30% coverage and found plants growing down to 11 feet. So that's encouraging, and hopefully, if we can sustain those aquatic plants, maybe we can sustain good water quality as well. Combined with carp removal and the other watershed projects, both for Upper Prior and for Spring Lake, bodes well for those lakes. Here's just kind of an increase in plant coverage over the years. Spring Lake, we found plants out to 12 feet of water depth last year. That's as deep as we have found plants going back a long time. So that's a positive indicator as well. Well, just to kind of summarize then, curly-leaf growth for a lot of these lakes, it turns out if we sample it and survey it enough, we find patterns and consistent, persistent areas of growth. It's within those areas that we find variation from year to year, and it's important to find that so we treat just what's necessary. We don't treat the whole area. We treat really what would be considered a potential nuisance. If curly-leaf, for example, is going to be a light growth, you really don't have to treat it. It acts very much like a native plant in those cases in terms of densities and abundance. Curly-leaf is still light to moderate in Fish Lake. Eurasian milfoil is not really a serious problem in Prior Lake right now at this point. We found, we're 1 year in, it's year one in Spring Lake. We'll see what happens. I wouldn't be surprised if we find more milfoil this year. That's kind of typically what it does. It's going to go 3 or 4 years, probably peak in about 4 or 5 years, and then after that, it'll settle back down to more of a light to moderate growth. It's been kind of the pattern for our watershed district, milfoil lakes. Upper Prior Spring Lake, plant coverage is increasing, and overall, plant diversity in Spring Lake is pretty good. That's 15 species is a high quality species richness for right now, so that's good to hear. Upper Prior might be following that, hopefully, in the future. So with that, any questions?
Thank you, Steve. Just a minute, Kurt. So first of all, it's always great when you come once a year, Steve. I mean, the enthusiasm for what you do just comes across. I mean, you know your stuff. You do a great job. It's actually fun to listen to you about something that probably the vast majority of us would never think about. It's great to see us on this trajectory, too, as you pointed out. So I think it's all some of the good work that staff and the board have been after to try and improve the health of these key lakes of ours. I did just have one question, though. When you were talking about some of the aspects of increasing the diversity and more coverage, isn't it the other aspect that this improves habitat for fish?
Oh, yes.
So it'll
right.
improve also from the fishing aspect of our key lakes?
Not only fish, but the invertebrates and the zooplankton. It's, yes, the more different types of what they call architecture of these plants, they offer habitat for a whole variety of organisms, particular and specifically fish, for sure.
Awesome,
Right.
thanks. Kurt, you had a question?
Steve, bullet point number 3 on summary, Eurasian autumn milfoil will likely spread in Spring Lake. I know the Spring Lake Association has been doing yeoman's work in trying to do something with that. Do we have any other alternatives? I mean, do we have to simply accept that it's going to be spread and we can't do any mitigation?
That's a great question. Can we contain it to a small area and keep it from spreading? And that's when milfoil first came into Minnesota in 1987 in Lake Minnetonka. There was a massive effort to try to contain it in one local spot in Lake Minnetonka. Found out that was not viable. They spent $750,000 on harvesters and everything else, really hit it hard. Had experts in from around the country, but we're not able to contain it. So milfoil, and then the pattern also was found, we found the same thing in White Bear Lake, where we tried to contain it. We were very aggressive, but milfoil will fragment either on its own or naturally or even with herbicide use, and each fragment can produce a new plant. So we have probably found that to try to contain it is not always the most cost-effective strategy, but to treat where it's a problem then turns out to be probably a better long-term model for management.
And if you recall, Kurt, I mean, the one other thing that we started a few years ago is to increase the amount of inspections to try and reduce the chance of all the invasives, that we're getting into our lakes. And there's some really nasty ones out there. It's a battle. You sometimes wonder whether it's worth fighting, but you do your best. You do a few things and hope you can reduce the quantity of invasives or It's
Well,
a tough problem.
I was just asking, are we destined to have this problem going forward and to get worse? That's what I'm asking. Isn't there anything proactive that we can do to jump on this? I know Spring Lake Association is very interested, and we all are on Spring Lake.
We can treat it where it's a problem, and that's probably the best management approach, knowing that it is going to continue to spread. What happens, these fragments are going to, they'll be floating around the lake, and within 5 or 6 years, it will have, all the shoreline areas will have been exposed to these fragments. And it's not all sediments are going to be conducive to growth, but where it is conducive to growth, we'll see that. That's kind of what happens with the curly leaf as well. We have those hot spot areas. We'll probably be finding those in Spring Lake too, and then we can treat those areas. I wouldn't expect Milfoil to take over Spring Lake. And it's going, the trajectory is 5 or 6 years, it's going to finally peak, and then after that is when it will settle back down to kind of like what happens in Lower Pryor. It's present, but it's not necessarily a heavy nuisance every year. Yes.
Christian?
Yes, so I am very excited to see the increasing diversity and amount of plant growth in the lakes. And with that, however, also comes that you have to educate people on the lakes about plant species, which I think is very important to try and learn what's the difference between an invasive species and when does it become a problem and what do you do about it. But then the other thing is, what about all the native species that are good, that to some extent can be a little annoying but maybe okay? And I know that our president from Spring Lake Association is right now is creating an education program that he plans to give to the Spring Lake residents. And I think that's really important to try and understand that, because it is important for the water quality, it is important for fish life and so on.
Exactly. I think it's well put. Even native plants sometimes can be invasive or act like invasives. And certainly in the nearshore areas, homeowners can manage those nuisance growth. At 2,500 square feet, the lakes, we're not going to hurt the lake, and that then gives us the recreational opportunities for fishing off the dock, swimming in an area, getting the boat in and out. So it's not that we can't do anything, but we don't want to do widespread management of especially the native plants as well.
Thanks again, Steve. Thanks for coming down.
You're welcome.
Good work, sir. Thank you. Thanks, Steve. Okay, we're on to the permit application for the City of Prior Lake South Roadway Reconstruction.
President Miser and managers. So the City of Prior Lake is planning to reconstruct 0.6 of a mile of streets in downtown Prior Lake this coming summer. That project will trigger rules C, D, and E of the district's rules, and requires that the city submit a permit application to the watershed district. The city, as part of this project, investigated several locations to meet the district rules in terms of stormwater management, and all of the sites that they investigated were deemed not to be feasible. So with that, the city is proposing to enter into a memorandum of understanding with the watershed district, where they will provide stormwater treatment elsewhere in Prior Lake, Spring Lake watershed district versus doing it directly downtown. And the MOU will state that within 24 months from the start of construction, the city will create that stormwater volume credit project. The city has already retained a consultant to start evaluating potential locations for that stormwater volume credit location within the city. So with that, staff does recommend to the board that the board approve the application subject to the conditions noted in the attached permit application of the staff review comments, as stated in the staff review comments.
Thanks, Joni. Any questions? I've got one, Joni. I noted in your write-up, on page 2 of the write-up in the second paragraph, it was stated that the construction of an underground system in downtown on a site that is no longer available. What happened to that?
Manager Miser, I believe that was the VFW site.
Okay.
And so that originally, it was intended that the stormwater treatment for this project and also some credits that they owe to the watershed district for another project, those would all be mitigated as part of the VFW site construction.
The bigger, broader project that,
As a bigger, broader project. Now that that project is not moving forward, the city now is looking for a new location to do the stormwater volume credits. And I should also say, so they do also have some credits already out there with us. So the idea of the new memorandum would incorporate their outstanding credits with these new credits. Put it all succinctly into one new memorandum for us to work off of.
got it. Thanks, Joni. Kurt? Did you want to ask?
Where was the site they were going to do it, and then it no longer became available? What was it again? Where was it?
The VFW site.
Oh, there. Okay. Okay. Yeah, I know. Councilman Braid is here, isn't there? I thought there was something that there's another developer that was looking at being able to do something there with the limit. You don't know of what the status of that is, huh? Okay. All right, thank you.
Since your mic's on, Kurt, would you like to make a motion for us, please?
All right. I move to approve the permit 22.01 City of Prior Lake Downtown South Roadway Reconstruction.
Do you want to do it regarding the staff recommendation, option 1?
Yeah, I'm
the
sorry.
conditions noted in the
Recommendation number 1.
With the conditions noted in the attached permit application, just to clarify, that's what you were after?
Well, yeah. With
Great.
with the conditions noted in the attached permit application.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second on the floor. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. That motion
Aye.
carries. Were you an aye too, Frank?
Oh,
I didn't hear
yeah,
you.
I was.
Awesome. Thanks. 4-0. Thanks, everybody. See why I got to keep my eye on this guy? Okay, we're on to the next item, please. The ILIDS pilot project renewal for 2022.
President Meiser and managers. In response to our Citizen Advisory Committee request, there was an initiative to implement the ILIDS device as a pilot project at the Spring Lake boat launch in 2021. And upon reviewing kind of the results of our first pilot year of the ILIDS project, the CAC now is recommending that the ILIDS pilot project be extended into 2022 with the following additions: that there be a concrete footing installed with the sign to minimize sign movement and false recordings occurring, to actually have all of the videos that are recorded with the ILIDS device to be reviewed by the ILIDS consultant, and that a QR code be placed on the sign that would direct people to an educational website where they could learn more about aquatic invasive species. The district's 2022 budget includes $5,000 for the ILIDS project. If we did similar activities to what was performed in 2021, the estimated cost would be $3,400. If we include the additional measures suggested by the CAC, the estimated cost for the ILIDS project is $7,400. And one of the main reasons for that increased cost is our estimated cost for the footing. It's a very conservative estimated cost for that footing, given the fact that we don't really quite understand where the water is underground, and that could require some additional construction techniques in order to get that footing in. So being safe, we are estimating that probably high for that footing, but once again, trying to show the worst possible cost. So with that, and it also should be said that the QR code component of it, it's yet to be determined whether that educational website would be hosted by the Spring Lake Association or Prior Lake Spring Lake Watershed District. If the Watershed District does host that website and develop the content, I would assume that would be another like 40 hours of staff time to accomplish that. So In order to, accommodate the proposed 7,400 budget, the staff looked at our budget, and later on, you'll see a contract proposal for the boat inspections, which is in the same budget item as the eyelids project. And that proposal came in $1,000 less than what we've budgeted. So there's $1,000 we can put towards this overage. In addition, staff has informed me that there is some monitoring activity that was in our original budget under our monitoring program, and that monitoring activity is not planned to happen for 2022. So we could reallocate some of that budget to cover the additional cost of the eyelids unit. So with that, staff is recommending that the managers vote to renew the eyelids pilot project for 2022, consistent with the CAC recommendations.
Thanks, Joni. Somebody want to go first? Anybody? Christian, go for it.
Yes, thank you, Joni. And I was just looking, I looked at the contractor installed footing there at $3,000, and I wondered, I know we have several people in our neighborhood that are concrete contractors, I like that know how to work with concrete. So I don't know if it's possible to work with the inventor of the eyelids program and get his assistance on how to create the footing, and maybe enlist some of the local people that have helped with the rain garden, and maybe construct it at considerably less than $3,000.
That is an option. We still would probably want the, as part of the cost, the contractor for the eyelids project did already propose a proposed footing. I would, though, suggest that we possibly have our engineer on staff as well to make sure that if there are water issues, that we are designing that footing appropriately so that we don't have freeze thaw and heave of that footing.
Anyone else? Then Frank?
So with the footing,
Nope, not on yet. There you go.
okay, thank you. With the footing, it's not a pilot project anymore. It's really kind of a permanent project, isn't it? I mean, doesn't the footing kind of nail it down? And that's okay, I mean,
Yeah, Manager Boyles, it does become a little more permanent because we will now have a concrete footing in place to affix the sign to. Currently, I believe it's a helical footing that's kind of screws in. And right now, that current footing and the size of the signs, when the wind gets going, that sign starts to move. And when that sign starts to move, then it triggers recordings that are false recordings. So that was the idea why you put in the more stable footing to keep that sign a little more stable and not have the false recordings. But you are correct. Investing in that footing does start making it a little closer to a permanent application, but
So I had one thing I would like to just share with my colleagues. I'm supportive of this project for all the reasons that we even kicked it off, and I still think it's a valid project. And I'm supportive of the additional stuff that we're doing on here to enhance this pilot project. There's one item, though, that that it didn't add. The costs were not included, and that was to do the website. And we've been, at least this board is familiar, that we're in a mode of trying to not to add new things to staff list. So that would be the only thing that, when I'm going to look for somebody to maybe make a motion that we strike, that district staff would be available for that, and encourage the SLA to take that on, just because we don't have the capacity to do that. That time would have to come from us doing other work that's currently required. So if we want to do the QR code, that it's under the condition that the SLA takes that on, or is willing to do that. And I know it's a small piece of this, but that's the only thing I would like to add into this for my colleagues. Does that seem reasonable, or anybody then want to make a motion? Something that covers that? Go ahead, Christian. You want to turn on your mic then, please, if you...
I will make a motion to recommend that the eyelids program will continue in 2022 with the suggested modifications, except if the QR code is added to it, that it will be managed by the Spring Lake Association, or in addition with the Citizen Advisory Committee that also have expressed interest in it.
Great, thank you.
Second.
We have motion and a second on the floor. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, that motion carries. Frank, you're an aye as well. Thank you, sir. Thanks, everybody. Okay, moving right along, we're then on to the Sutton Lake Iron Enhanced Sand Filter Feasibility Study.
Right, as I had mentioned in the programs and projects update, we have 6 projects that the board has prioritized for the upper watershed blueprint project, and one of those is the Sutton Iron Enhanced Sand Filter, and we have just finalized the feasibility study for that project. So the iron enhanced sand filter would be placed at the outlet of Sutton Lake, and you can see the red star indicates that location. And then the water flows up to Spring Lake. So this would be reducing the amount of phosphorus reaching Spring Lake. And here's just a close-up of the location. The yellow highlighted area is where the filter would actually be placed, and this is Sutton Lake right here. Here's the actual plan of the iron enhanced sand filter. So I'm not going to get too detailed, but Sutton Lake is coming in from the right in this picture, so north is actually facing to the left. But the water would come in, and then there's the interesting thing about this sand filter is it's a 2-tiered cell, which is unique to this situation because an iron enhanced sand filter needs to dry out in order to become to avoid becoming anoxic, which can actually release phosphorus in anoxic conditions. So it's a neat design where we would staff at this point, the design can be changed, but at this point staff would go out potentially every couple weeks or so and change which cell the water would be going into to be most efficient. So I don't know if I'm going to talk too much more about the plan unless you guys end up asking questions, but overall the project is expected to cost about $1.5 million, and that's also including maintenance over 18 years. It's expected to remove about 345 pounds of phosphorus per year. When you break that down, that's 250 pounds of phosphorus per pound of phosphorus removed, which is kind of a calculation that we like to see to be able to compare apples to apples to all of our phosphorus removing projects, and that's a very reasonable rate. So overall, out of all the water leaving Sutton Lake, it would be reducing 44% of the phosphorus. And for the total maximum daily load study, so there's a study done on Spring Lake because it's impaired for water quality, and there's a certain number of pounds of phosphorus that you need to remove to potentially get Spring Lake to a point where it's going to stay below the water quality standards. So this would actually reduce the phosphorus by 12%, or that would be 12% of that load that we're trying to reduce, the total load that we're trying to reduce. So that's a very significant number. It's a great reduction for one single project. So we are waiting on landowner approval. It's, as of now, probably going to be a year and a half before we get any sort of more commitment, one way or the other, but we'll try to work with the landowner on getting some sort of answers sooner than that. So we are recommending that the board approve this study as is, but I'll open it up for questions if you'd like to.
Thank you. Somebody want to go first? I had 2 questions. Christian, yours.
Yeah, just a quick suggestion. So we're looking at how can we make the sand filter as attractive as possible when you look at it from your land. And so just looking at it, I was thinking about, could you plant some evergreens around it, or whatever, like some trees around it. Evergreens grow quickly. and it would make it look more attractive for the landowners, and also be good for wildlife, and you know, like they can
That's a really good suggestion.
not in it but around it.
Right, right. Yeah, that is one of the concerns of the landowner, that, you know, how it's gonna look, so that's,
So if you present the study here, and if you have some trees standing here, that might help, if
Yeah.
there's room for it.
we can look into that.
Thank you.
Sure. Thanks.
Anybody else have anything? So Jamie, I was going to follow up with the comment that was written in here, and you sort of talked to it, or you spoke to it briefly, but you said the landowner is open to considering the project in the future, knowing how critical this is. And I was involved in one of the conversations with the landowner. Is it still really, maybe he's supportive of the project, but there might be a timing issue for this individual, or was there something more to this that's creating maybe any risk of this project moving forward?
It is more than just the timing. There's landowner changes that need to happen, and that would be about that 1.5-year timeline. But he is concerned about how it will affect the value of his property. And as I think we discussed, it's kind of his retirement fund, you know, so he wants to make sure that this isn't going to reduce that. So he does have a couple other concerns that aren't just regarding the landowner
timing.
changes. I talked to him a couple weeks ago, and he just wanted to say, like, he feels kind of pressured that, like, we're kind of banking on him doing this, and he actually threw out an option for another property downstream that we might want to look into, and just restating that he hasn't committed, but
Gotcha.
he's in favor of the idea. He just is not 100% committing, and he
Yep.
wants to make sure, you know, like all the legal.
Dot i's, cross t's, and
Yeah,
I'm sure it's
so-
not handcuffing him in any way, which I
Right.
get. It's fair enough. We're going to run into this in every one of our projects in the upper watershed, so, yeah, fine. Kurt, sounded like you have,
I have a question on the maintenance of this thing now. How often do the metal filings have to be raked clean? A couple times a year, and how long are the metal filings good for before they have to be replaced?
If I can divert that question to Brett with EOR, I think he can answer that better.
thank you.
Oh, there we go. Good questions. So in essence, this is, managers and board, this is serving as a filter, a sand filter, and the way it's designed is actually to have some clean sand on top before you get to the iron filings. And so that is, if it starts to get some sediment buildup where it's, you know, decreasing how quickly the water moves through, you can rake that off. And that could be, it's very dependent on what the sediment load is. And this is fairly clean water coming out of here, so I wouldn't expect that that's very frequent. So it could be on the order of probably years and not several times a year. Some filters we work with are probably like 2 or 3 times a year, but I don't think it'll be at that kind of frequency. We'll just have to monitor as it goes on. And then your second part of your question was how long does the iron last? So the iron filings are in that next layer of sand, and that's where the phosphorus will absorb to. And so our, based on the amount of phosphorus coming in and the hydraulic load and how fast that iron gets used up, our estimate is about an 18-year lifespan for that iron. So at that point, you would be looking at pulling that sand, you know, the top sand layer and the iron sand layer out, bring in new iron and sand, and then a new sand cap, and then it should be good again for that type of year. But we do give a range of years because that will depend on, you know, those are all based on averages. If you end up getting a wet spell and there's more iron coming in, it could be a shorter lifespan, or it could be that you don't get as much loading and we sample the iron and it looks like it's still good and it could go longer than 18 years, but that's our estimate at this point.
So in other words, this sand filter goes all the way from, the berm, all the way out to County Road 10. Boy, that's a long distance, isn't it?
Yeah, so it's a large bed, so the water will come in and fill up and then filter down, and there's drain tile underneath it that allows that cleaned water to then drain downstream to the ditch.
The channel.
It's a good size area though, yes.
I mean, I didn't envision it this big, but if it's necessary, I guess. Thank you.
Yeah.
If there are no further questions, I'd entertain a motion to accept the feasibility study.
Make a motion to approve the Sutton Lake Iron Enhanced Sand Filter Feasibility Study.
Second?
We have motion second on the floor. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, that motion carries. Thank you, sir. Okay, we're on to the next item, the Moan Drainage Swale Stabilization Project.
Sorry, I guess that's me too. Okay. This is a project that was brought to our attention by the Scott Soil and Water Conservation District a few months ago. And the county ditch inspector had noticed a gully that had been forming over the past decade or so that has been eroding at a more significant rate. And this gully that we're talking about is located right here, so just from looking at the photo, you can kind of see how incised this gully is. And this is the ditch that runs, ditch 13, it connects to ditch 13 just to the right of this photograph, so you can get some sort of an idea where this is. This is just north of Lydia. So Lydia is right down here, the red dot is the gully, and then the water flows down to Sutton, or Spring Lake. The picture on the left is a SWCD staff member standing in the gully, so it is pretty significant, and it's kind of hard to see with all the snow in the picture, but the ditch is right behind that. What the Soil and Water has proposed is just a fairly simple project to smooth out the banks and kind of broaden it, and then line it with a lined rock waterway there, so it stops eroding. So this gully, the calculations that they did, they found that it is contributing about 8 pounds of phosphorus to Spring Lake every year. So based on how much this project would cost, about $30,000, it would cost about $118 per pound of phosphorus removed. If you remember talking about the other projects, that number is based on just the watershed district funding alone and construction costs. So if what we're asking for with this project is that the board approves this project, that the Soil and Water would fund 55% of this project with a Clean Water Fund grant, and that the watershed district would fund 45% of it with a combination of cost share funds and other funds. On the right, I should just point out that picture is showing how the gully has progressed over time. So there's the estimated gully dimensions in 2006 compared to 2021. So you can see that it's progressing pretty quickly. So some of the pros about this project is that it's pretty much ready to go. They have a design ready, and the grant is paying over half of the project. There's very little staff time that's needed. It's cost effective, and it is within the upper watershed, which is the area that the board is choosing to focus phosphorus removal on. The cons are that it's a fairly small amount of phosphorus that it's contributing, so it's not going to make a huge difference, and it wasn't one of the top 6 projects that was prioritized by the board. So we are just asking if the board wants to, if we recommend that the board approve a contribution of $13,536 towards this project, with $4,500 funded through the cost share budget, and then with the remaining funds, we have options of either choosing it to fund it through the cash reserves, a combination of the PIPP budgeted funds and cash reserves, or through the Upper Watershed Blueprint budgeted funds. I think that's all I've got, so I can open it up to questions.
Thanks, Jamie. Go ahead, Kurt.
The first question, the main question I have is this swale. I mean, does Soil and Water inspect every year ditch 13?
Do they inspect it every year? No, the county ditch inspector is the one that counts
And
this.
they do it every year?
I don't know the answer to that question.
I mean, this thing is 8 feet deep. You realize the number of years that this must have been existing before somebody finally discovered it? And I know where this area is. It's off the road. You can't see it. I fully get that, north of Lydia. But, I mean, 8 feet deep, this had to have been eroding for some time. I think it would be interesting if we looked into it, Joni, just to see if how often the county inspector gets through this area on this, so that maybe this doesn't happen again. Because a lot of bad stuff already went in, and now because the ditch is deeper, it's going to cost us more money to fix it. Okay? Thank you.
Christian?
Yes, so I would be in favor of funding the project because like you stated, it's, that the staff time associated with is minimal. The project is designed and ready for construction, and therefore in a very short amount of time we will actually do something to remove phosphorus from ditch 13. So for those reasons I would, and the cost to the watershed district I think is fairly small, so while we're trying to be prudent with money, I still feel it would be a good investment.
Okay. Frank, did you have a question? Okay.
I was going
not
to
yet.
second.
Not yet.
Was
No.
that a motion?
Nope. I'm going to ask a couple of questions first, if I might. Joni, as I understand it, right, ditch 13 is the responsibility for the county, where they have control over the ditch. Now, I know this is a feeder into the ditch, but can you speak to sort of I don't know if it's the word choice is like the jurisdiction, who has responsibility? I know why we care because of the phosphorus going downstream, but is this sort of really the WMO's responsibility?
I mean, this isn't officially County Ditch 13 either. It does, the gully feeds into a feeder ditch, then the feeder ditch feeds into County Ditch 13. So really, this really, my guess is that this doesn't even fall underneath the jurisdiction of the WMO as it relates to County Ditch 13. If you want us to learn a little bit more about the ditch maintenance practices, we'd have to do a little more research and get back to you on that.
I mean, in essence, that's what I got thinking about, and I didn't know that. We've not had any sort of a project like this come forward, so that's why I wasn't aware.
Yeah, and I'm not exactly sure, once again, so the ditch inspector alerted Soil and Water to this issue, and Manager Hennis, maybe they didn't see it for a while because, once again, it's like 2 steps removed from the county ditch, but they may have just kind of stumbled across it.
Okay.
I don't really know for sure.
I'll ask Bruce Loney, one of our managers, is out of state right now and couldn't make the meeting, but he did ask a question, and I thought it was a good one. He copied me on this. It went to Joni. Can you, and maybe I'll even ask it this way, was there a conversation that the WMO would contribute cash to this project as well, outside of going after a grant application?
We did not have a discussion with the WMO. We did, Jamie, if you want to talk about conversations with Soil and Water.
Right, yeah. For the WMO, just to clarify, we don't
I'm
share
sorry.
areas with.
I should have said SWCD.
Okay.
I apologize. That's
Sure.
what I meant.
Yes, so Soil and Water, yeah, we have spoken with Soil and Water Conservation District about funding for this project, and so 55% of the funding would come from a grant from Soil and Water, but Soil and Water Conservation District gets their funding through grants and also fee for services, so they don't have their own pile of money to contribute to projects like this. That's the only way that they fund projects is through grants like this.
Okay.
If that answers.
So my probably last question before I think we're going to get a motion, but can you clarify what little time means? Again, only because I'm aware of our concern with staff time. Can you just do a little clarification of what that meant? I mean, is it 1 hour, 2 hours, 8 hours?
I would guess on the order of 1 to 2 hours. I really don't know, besides letting them to go ahead, what I would contribute.
No, just Total,
1 to 2 hours,
yeah, total, right? Clarifying, Jamie?
over what
Okay.
span of time?
Over the project.
It would
Just
be
very-
completed by the end of this year, so.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Was there somebody who wanted to make a motion?
I move that the board approve the Moan Drainage Swale Stabilization Project.
Second?
We have a motion and a second on the floor. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Sorry.
That motion carries 4-0. Thanks, everybody. Okay, we're on to the consent agenda. So this is typically where we approve en masse unless somebody pulls something off the consent agenda. So I'm going to ask my colleagues, is there anything anyone wanted removed from the consent agenda this evening? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to approve the consent. Do
Motion to approve the consent agenda.
we have a second?
Second.
Awesome. All those in favor say aye.
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 That motion carries 4-0. Thanks, everybody. All right, now, our treasurer, who was just put in this position, and I know you're not ready to do this, and neither was I even prepped to do this, Christian, but let me kind of take this from an extremely high level here this evening and just let everybody know. So typically, this is the period at which our treasurer, has been Bruce Loney, up until Christian was willing to step up to that here this evening. He is not prepped to handle this, and typically Bruce would have been probably the one to prep him and work him through doing this first one. And I hadn't even thought about that yet, so I'm just going to let you know that I have looked at this, and I think things are in good order on behalf of the public. There are funds there. The budget is in good order. So I've just reviewed it, and that's about what we're going to get from a treasurer's report tonight, unless anybody has any further questions. So, yeah, go ahead. Of course, you're going to get me back here this evening, aren't you? Go ahead, Frank. What do you?
Okay. No, I think it's important to emphasize that we're reserving money
Correct.
for bigger projects that you can't possibly raise in 1 year.
Yes.
But they're important projects to our efforts.
Yes.
If I could just read off a couple numbers in this quick, and then
Go ahead.
we can pass it. For the assets, we've got 1.5 million in Old National, 71,000 in Sterling Bank, which is our checking account. We have Northern Securities with $350,000 for a total subtotal assets of approximately $2 million. Our restricted funds are assigned funds for Alum and for Upper Watershed Blueprint balance. All that comes into approximately $1 million, and our available cash at the end of February 2022 is $1,027,000. And of course, we're changing banks to a Minnesota League of Cities sponsored 4M fund, Minnesota Management Money Market Fund, which we're going to be doing all of our banking through. We just found out about this from our accountant CLA, and I wish we had known about this a long time ago. Woody, I see you out there way back. This was created in 1987. I had no idea. But we've changed banks 3 or 4 times because Prior Lake State Bank became Client State Bank. Client State Bank became Old National. We've gone through all sorts, and then we went on to Sterling. But hopefully, this will put an end to things. But if you do you need a motion on this, Mr. President, or not?
Nope.
Okay.
Nope.
Thank you.
It's just a review.
Thank you.
Thank you. Joni?
President Meiser, I also just want to point out that there are draft year-end statements for 2021, and we are scheduled to have our annual audit performed in 2 weeks.
Great.
So we are coming in on that, and once the audit's complete, we'll obviously bring that forward for the board.
Great. Thanks, Joni. So everybody's chipping in on this one, so awesome. Does anybody want to review the upcoming meeting event schedule that we have here? Kurt, you want to do this?
Yeah. We have our monthly CAC meeting, which is always the last Thursday of the month, by the way. It's at 6:30, usually downstairs in Wagon Bridge. And again, it's from 6:30 to 8 p.m. There are subcommittees that meet from 6 to 6:30, so we look forward to that. Our next Board of Managers meeting is Tuesday, April 12th. Again, the workshop at 4 o'clock, the actual board meeting at 6. And again, I remind everyone that on March 16th, which I think is a Wednesday, is the Healthy Soils second meeting at the Ridges Golf Course south of Jordan on 21. Again, encourage everyone to go to that. It's a real education in today's agriculture and today's soil restoration, preservation, and enhancement. Thank you.
Thank you. Christian?
Yes, I thought I would just mention that at the last CAC meeting, we elected new officers. So Christopher Crowhurst is now going to be the chair for the CAC. Lauren Hansen will be our vice chair, who is here tonight. And Ben Burnett will continue to be our fabulous secretary. And Matt Toffanelli, that's also here tonight, will be joining the board here from the CAC in June.
Thank you, sir. Christian, as long as your mic's on, you want to make a motion to adjourn, sir?
I make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Second.
We have a motion and a second on the floor. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
That motion carries. Thanks, everybody. Good night.
Thanks for coming, everybody.